these roads, the way that they're designed, in no way, shape, or form consider the lives and realities of people that live along them. So yes, development authorities say if we build a road, anyone can use it. It's open for shared use, so that's just going to benefit people. And that's true to a lot of extents, but when a road is going through an area with loads of wildlife or tons of pastoralists or a lot of communities living right alongside it, and you don't see a single overpass or underpass, it's just very clear that this road is someone else's vision and not the vision of people who live alongside it. So to me, that's very indicative around how the government sort of sees infrastructure and the role of infrastructure. It's about, from a national perspective, shipping goods out, basically. And that reflects in a whole host of other ways as well. People aren't consulted generally during the planning and design of infrastructure. People are often displaced without any form of compensation. People who lose livestock or even children as a result of the road, directly or indirectly, receive no compensation. It's just a vision that does not care all that much about people who live alongside the road. It's a very much get in, get out, like a tool for facilitating the cheap transport of goods.
When they were building the road, sometimes the road went over top of where their well was, or the construction cut them off from it, or they cut the pipe from the borehole. So there's lots of issues around connecting and disconnecting water sources, using up the water for the construction and then leaving them dry. Or the construction workers installed a new pump so they could get the water that they wanted, ripped out the old pump, destroyed it, then they left and they took their pump with them. So the construction just left a lot of people with worse access. Some, if they left that new installation, then they got a nicer water supply than before. But there were lots of stories people were telling of the sort of reduced access to water that the construction caused. The roads, the buildings, all of the growth that's happening, generally everything is built out of concrete. And concrete is made of the cement powder, sand, and gravel sort of aggregates. So there's a huge demand for sand. Worldwide, in fact, it's becoming a huge problem that this is happening. They have to get a permit from the county, but in this location, they sort of just get a generic, yes, you're allowed to go do it. It's not by truckload or by weight or anything. We were standing on the other bank where some of the group had been there a year before, and it had been very sandy, and we were just standing on rock. So they had literally cleared all of the sand off of that. It's widening the river, and you can see as the sand disappears from the banks, it's getting wider and wider and wider. So that's actually slowing it down, which means it's heating it up, and it's changing the water flows that people downstream might expect. So you would have all sorts of environmental impacts to the things living in the river water and everything else, as well as just to this whole landscape that's changing with the sand being moved around. And this is happening at a really fast pace, and probably there's only a few more years of sand left there. It's a really, really interesting problem that's not being studied or regulated that we could tell. So the one to the left is the first one that they built out of the corrugated sheet metal. So there's a woman who works for this community, and she sells the water, but she's just got sort of a hose, and she fills up people's containers, and it's kind of muddy everywhere because the hose is always dribbling and various things. And the manager of the treatment works said, well, we built that one first just to get something in place. And then when we had the money, we built the nice one next door. So that's a proper building with, concrete floors and concrete walls. But when they went to talk to the people buying the water, they were all buying it from the woman with the mud and the hose, because the new one is an automated one and it's coin operated, and people are afraid that it's going to eat their coins and not give them the water. So they're very, very reticent to use it. If you were filling up a lot of containers, then the lady would kind of cut you a deal. Whereas the kiosk is, you put in one coin, you get your however many 5 liters, 10 liters out, and that's it. There's not enough water already. So the Isiolo Water Treatment Works, they told us that their water for this new works had to come from the neighboring county, and that was very politically charged, that they didn't want the water going to Isiolo, and it took a lawsuit and several years, and they in fact have armed guards at the water source to make sure that people don't come and try to shut it down. And that's only going to get worse, those kinds of conflicts, as more and more people arrive to live in these towns.
The infrastructure that we looked at for this project is part of a much broader development, which is called the Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopia Transport Corridor, and it goes as LAPSET for short. And the idea is that this project, which is comprised of multiple roads, highways, railways, a pipeline, ports, as well as various other pieces, will connect South Sudan, Ethiopia, northern Kenya to the port. But also in the longer term ambition is that this will form the start of a land bridge that connects East Africa to West Africa. So the port in Lamu will be connected by infrastructure that runs all the way to Cameroon. When Kenya went through colonization, the colonial government decided this region's too insecure, the people are too difficult, there's too much violence for us to have to deal with it, so we're just going to create basically an internal border within the country. We won't direct any resources up north. We won't do anything to aid or help development up north. We're just going to block it off. And so while the southern parts of Kenya went through a development process under the colonial administration, the north was kind of just left on its own.
Pastoralism is the keeping of livestock, goats, sheep, and cattle, and camel. Obviously, these livestock have material needs. They require regular access to pasture. They require regular access to water. For centuries, it suits this environment quite well. It keeps people on the move. It allows certain sources of pasture and water to be conserved while people go looking elsewhere. It does come with challenges. There's often conflict over pasture and water for cattle and other livestock. And in some cases, depending on the year and depending on the political situation, that conflict can become quite violent. Development authorities and planners see pastoralism as a nuisance that needs to be managed, or at worst, a kind of useless, unproductive livelihood that just needs to go. But to come in and focus purely on that would be almost political suicide. So some investments and some narratives are being sort of told around trying to enhance the productivity of pastoralism as well. So there's some investments that development planners are saying, okay, well, we'll invest in modern slaughterhouses, and well, you can use this road for transporting livestock on, and we'll even build an airport where you can fly meat to the Middle East, camel meat, which is apparently in high demand in the Middle East. But the main focus and the vision certainly of planners is about opening up the North for investment. It's just as much about controlling people, pushing them into a modern future, as it is about sort of really supporting economic activities and economic livelihoods among pastoralist groups. Transport vehicles kill, tourism vehicles do, people have reported police vehicles doing it. Like it's like everyone, everything, they just go as fast as they can because they're not used to having such a good road. And conversely, people and animals along the road haven't had time to adapt. So depth perception, or like judging speed, is, people say, a major challenge. When this used to be a dirt road filled with potholes, you could only move like 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. You have loads of time. If you see a vehicle 200 meters away, you probably have like quite a lot of time to pass the road. But now if you see a vehicle 200 meters away and it's moving 150 kilometers an hour, yeah, that ability to judge speed and distance hasn't necessarily translated. And all of a sudden, what side of the road you live on really matters. So if every day you have to cross the road with your livestock to get to the borehole, that's not only a safety risk and a major inconvenience, but it can end up costing you 10, 20 goats, 30 goats a month or whatever, right?
We could call it anticipatory infrastructure, in that the infrastructure's been built before the economic development, it's to prompt that. The people that were talked to in this area didn't know about the plans for the resort city. This is very much affecting local people's lives, for good and for ill, in various ways. But the whole sort of planning vision and so on is taking place at another level of government, quite remote from what people are experiencing in their everyday lives. It requires a national or at least regional level of planning and coordination. This sort of went out of fashion in the 1980s and 1990s with neoliberalism and so on. And in some ways this is a return to this big planned projects, what we might call schemes to improve the human condition at a grand scale. There was an era in which master plans were critiqued for, if you like, literally driving a bulldozer through people's lives, not taking into account the everyday dynamics of people's lives, not adapting to local circumstances and so on, being remotely planned and then implemented, and the impact felt by local people. So they were critiqued for that reason.
When changes take place, even when they're for the good of people, even when they provide people with their rights or their needs are being met, they still can have an adverse impact if people feel like it's interrupting on their cultural practices, their social practices, the way they want to live. Even a change that makes the delivery of water more efficient can cause a lot of tension and anxiety in people's lives because it interrupts a way of life. When women had sat in on meetings, they had heard the word used for oil, and because they lived in a community, many of these communities have no cars or nothing that requires oil. that word in their heads was the same word as cooking oil. And no one had taken the time to explain that different types of oil exist. And so actually a number of the women that had sat in on these consultations were really excited about the cooking oil that would be coming out of the ground, and they felt it was going to bring new economic opportunities that would benefit them. They talked about pooling their money to buy large amounts of cooking oil and dividing it up to sell it to families nearby. So they had been very positive about the opportunities they saw oil development and infrastructure development bringing them. It's really not possible for us to talk about the impacts of projects like LAPSET without recognizing that the cultural changes are what most concerns us, or what we're really worried about. And while it's possible to mitigate some of these other impacts, while it's possible to put overpasses over railways so that pastoralists can move easily, or to put policies in place to better regulate sand mining, it's a lot harder to regulate cultural changes that come about as more and more people pass through the region. And this is what they were really concerned about. Things like their community cohesion changing because they're so much more exposed to different people on a different basis. Their ways of living, the houses they live in, the livelihoods they practice coming under pressure because of economic development and modernization, and the general lack of respect for the ways that they wish to live. There is a tendency to place cultural change lower in the list of concerns that people might have when there's mega infrastructure projects coming about. But that these cultural changes are actually intimately linked to all the other changes that are happening in the region, and they can't be placed at the bottom of our list of concerns.